Travels of the Elisaba is an audio narrative set in the world of Bastion using 5e compatible characters. A dark fantasy world with chaos, intrigue, magic, and mystery. The story, setting, and sounds are written by Lonomy and published by Lonomy Creative. Tune in for episode 13, Killian. Dust began to scatter amidst the arched halls of the Calohard Sanctum, as the heavy wooden doors were forced open by a gang of 3 vicious individuals. Humans each, they all bore a foul disposition, contrasting against fine jackets and a myriad of weapons and armor made from fine steel. Among them, one brought what appeared to be a mechanical crossbow to bear, loaded and toting it dangerously. The other 2 were taller and more brutish. One carried a jagged-looking sword that had been dented from what appeared to be months of misuse and poor upkeep. The other, also balding with a limp to his gait, wore brass knuckles and arms wrapped with oiled cloth and leather. As they wandered into the antechamber, each of them continued to bark insults at the members of the Knightly Order, calling out the pirates that had only recently become acquainted with its halls. Come now, we haven't got all day. The last thing we need is to start a brawl. This place seems so nice and fragile. The crossbow-wielding thug waved his weapon precariously as he spoke aloud. And suddenly, the bolt fired in an errant arc, whistling through the air until it tore through the lining of a nearby tapestry. Stuck fast to the wall, the bolt clung to the stone as if it had punctured a soft burlap sack. Powerful indeed, if it were able to pierce the thick, polished stone of the sanctum interior. The remainder of the thugs, what appeared to be an ill-gotten pair of brothers, continued to stumble through the antechamber, making horrible remarks toward the elves that stood between them and the crew of the Elisaba. They snarled and sneered, laughing as they did so. It appeared to all present that they cared little for the decorum that existed before their entry. Stepping from the adjacent corridor, one of the acolytes of the chapel, a fair and charming Meladrin, her hair kept short above her shoulders and wreathed in a silver coronet, she stepped forward to meet these crude, uninviting guests. Her robes flowed behind her, cinched to her waist by a cerulean belt, and with all manner of icons that wrapped around her waist. And as one of the brutish brothers made to move past her, she outstretched her hands, and as she did so, a translucent wave of brackish water began to appear as if conjured from thin air. And with a wave of her hand, a long, spindly creature began to pour from the water, as if summoned through a rushing wave or a portal from another plane. Its form began to shift from a trickling wave of water to a corporeal wisp of scales, fangs, and tendrils. And from her wave, she birthed an elemental that took the form of a sea serpent, coiling around her arm and now outstretched toward the brute. And with a hiss and a snarl, the serpent bore its ferocity toward them, causing the brutes to take a single step back, their weapons now trained upon the creature. And then, speaking softly despite the rude interruption, the acolyte returned to a neutral pose and addressed them. You have impressed upon our walls with weapons drawn and your intent known. We do not take kindly to conflict within this place. Why else would it be called a sanctum? Before you consider your options and how you will respond, I'll remind you that these so-called pirates are guests. They were invited before the clergy, and we have welcomed them thus. You, however, have not been privy to an invitation and should be careful how you tread. This place is home to 100 knights of Calohart, and we will not be seen to allow villains to stain the carpet. And shifting at her words, the thug seemed almost intent toward her, drawn towards her almost incorrigible nature. Despite this, their weapons continued aloft as they stepped toward each other, taking a more defensive stance. And to all that could see, they did not appear to be ready to turn tail and flee. If anything, they appeared as if they were ready to snap at any moment. And as the tension grew, there was a moment where it felt as if any one of the individuals present, knights, acolytes, pirates, or thugs, would snap, firing the first shot and ending the stalemate. That was until, from the shadows beyond the door, another voice rang through. A confident, timid voice that seemed to echo effortlessly throughout the halls. It was not booming or thunderous, though it carried a weight that seemed almost unnatural. Darian, perched on a high floor and surveying the conflict, began to quiver as the voice crawled up his spine. Stepping through the threshold, a shorter man, less stocky than the others, but with a bearing of confidence and agility. He wore simple leathers, wreathed with an unfamiliar pattern, and hoisting what appeared to be a large fishing hook on his right shoulder. As the light of day began to give way to his silhouette, all could see the form of the man, as his eyes went from a dark crimson back to a common light brown. And with a smile, he addressed the floor. "I apologize for the inconvenience, good sirs and madams of the Calahat Sanctum. You see, my boys here are loyal, faithful, and strong, but they lack the manners and decorum that most reachmen value. I, on the other hand, am happy to let these peaceful talks ensue." With his remarks, he raised his left hand as the three thugs stood at attention, parting for the new guest to step through. "You see, we only wish to greet with the travelers that recently descended upon your halls. We're travelers ourselves, you see, and we'd like to show them around town if possible. The Briny Ward is such a huge city, and it's easy to get lost. We only wish somebody had shown us the ropes before we got tangled in some nasty business." He turned his head toward the ceiling, roughly in the direction that the crew were tucked in and listening to the conversation. "Darian, was it? Pardon me for being interested, but I've heard you're the man to talk to about dealing with witches and sirens. The name is Killian Besk. I was a sailor myself until I managed to run aground of this hovel. Any chance you're free to have a chat? Conversation? Maybe over a cup of coffee?" A few aching moments passed, with the dust settled throughout the room, and all remained silent. The faint clanking of armor could be heard as a number of knights shuffled within earshot, their hands on the pommels of their weapons. "Look, it doesn't appear that your hosts are very interested in hosting our good selves. Perhaps another venue? You there, miss. Yeah, you with the sea snake. Care to pass on a message for me? 3 blocks over, there's an alleyway with a sign of a horseshoe hanging over the corner. Tell your captain that he can meet us there and we can talk. Over a drink." As he finished his last sentence, there was a sourness that came over his tone. He gave no threat or glimpse of conflict, but his words continued to echo throughout the hall, still chilling down Darian's spine. And with a flick of his wrist, the hand that held the crude fishhook aloft seemed to crackle for a moment. A burst of air and a spray of water as the conjured elemental returned to a watery conglomerate, splashing upon the floor. All the acolytes that were present stood agog. The elemental dispelled, and the conflict ended as the 4 wretched sailors turned and shuffled out the doors of the sanctum. The mood felt as if it had deflated, each and every member of the sanctum turning toward each other in confusion. It had felt as if a weight had been suddenly lifted and they were able to breathe deeply for the first time. And realizing the sheer pressure of the situation had lifted, even the crew of the Elazaba turned in confusion, pondering on this new predicament. Captain, what on earth was that? Did you feel that power too? It's almost like he was talking directly to us. Well, that can't be though, we're upstairs. What did he say his name was again? And as the question left Edward's lips, the crew turned to see the captain clutching at his chest. The black medallion seemed to hang heavily, boring into the back of his neck. His fingers gripping it tightly, a look of perplexity shot across the crew as Darian breathed heavily, uttering a single word from his lips. Killian. Travels of the Elazaba is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most notably, our patrons. Thanks to Rob Jenkin, Nathan Ebley, Ensign Turtle, and Alex von Hostrit for supporting us so far on this journey. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget, take care of each other.